Okay, the clock is 9:30 and we will kick off this webinar. So welcome everyone to this webinar about GDPR and BizWizard and how it works. My name is Christian Andreasson and I am the product manager for BizWizard at Lime. With me today I have my colleague Ulf, who will answer questions in the chat during this webinar. There will be no other way to interact during the webinar, and we will also try to answer questions after the webinar through the chat. And if there are questions that we can't answer, we will get back to you at a later stage with an email with answers on these questions. I will also say that we are not a legal firm or lawyers. We can't answer questions regarding GDPR as a law or a regulation. What we will do and what we can do is to describe for you how you can use BizWizard to comply with those different requirements that comes with GDPR. But since the regulations is up for interpretation, we won't be able to say anything about what you should do or how you should do stuff and so on, apart from when it comes to your use of BizWizard. Great. So the agenda. Okay. Welcome everyone. What I understood, there has been some problem with the sound, so I will start over again here. Welcome to this webinar about GDPR and BizWizard. My name is Christian Andreasson and I'm the product manager for BizWizard. With me today, I have my colleague Ulf, that will be in the chat and being answering questions that you might have regarding the webinar. One thing I want to mention here is that we are not a legal firm. We are not lawyers, so we won't be able to answer questions regarding the regulation or the law itself. We can only answer questions that are regarding BizWizard, basically. And this is since the GDPR is up for interpretation and so on, and we can't give you advice in how you should do or how you should think regarding different aspects of this in your work to actually set up your organization and your processes towards to be compliant with GDPR. We will also have a session in the end of the webinar where we will answer questions, and if there are questions that we can't answer, we will definitely get back to you in an email with answers on these questions. Okay. The agenda for this webinar is quite simple. We're going to start to discuss a little bit about GDPR, and then we're going to dive into a demo where I'm going to show you a couple of tools and ways of working for how to actually set up and work with BizWizard to be able to be compliant with the GDPR rules. Some of those tools I will show you are not available in the production environment yet. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about time plan for when you as a customer will be able to actually use those features. And as I said earlier, we finish this or end up this webinar with if there are any questions, basically. Okay. So I'm not going to talk a lot about what GDPR is. I'm sure everyone knows quite a lot about that at this time. But what it does is that it brings a new set of digital rights for all EU citizens. And we're going to talk a little bit about what these rights are, and also how we can use BizWizard to actually ensure that we can support those individual rights for the recipients we are sending emails to, basically. It's also important to know that GDPR affects everyone who is processing personal data. And that means if you are using BizWizard, you will be affected of GDPR, since you are having at least email addresses in your register or in your database there. And it will take effect May 25th. So it's a little bit more than a month left. And I can imagine that many of you are working hard with this at the moment. And hopefully what we're going to see today will also help you a little bit in this work, and at least ensure that you can comply to these rules in your work with BizWizard. So, looking into some of those individual rules or individual rights that are important, and then GDPR states that an individual has the right to be informed, meaning that you have to inform any person about why you're collecting personal data and what the purpose of the collecting and processing is. For instance, in email marketing and in BizWizard, there might be that you have to work with your opt-in or subscription forms, that you make those clearer or so. But we will look into that. An individual also have the right to be able to access the personal data that you are managing and processing about the person. So you are required to be transparent about what kind of data you have about an individual and what you are doing with it, basically. The person also have the right to get data that you processing rectified and also erased if on requirement. And that can be that you are required to erase part of the data or the complete data, and that's what we refer to basically be forgotten. An individual or a person will be forgotten in your data registers, basically. Also, a person has the right to ask you for her data, and then you are required basically to provide this data in a standardized format, so that the person can take this data and go somewhere else with it, basically. Also, a person has the right to object and restrict processing. Well, that's basically when you are storing data and processing data, but the individual might not have the right to be forgotten or want you to still continue processing the data, but with some restrictions. One example here could be that an recipient in BizWizard needs to have the possibility to actually say that I want this kind of communication, but I don't want this kind of communication. You can't do any profiling of my information that you store or so. Yeah, one example. And also an important thing, historically, we have been able to collect email addresses and other personal data with quite vague consent from the different recipients. Now, with GDPR, the requirements for the consent part of actually storing and processing the personal data will be much higher. So you will have to think about how you want to work with your consent, and also how you want to work with the consents that you already have in your existing recipient database. But it's a little bit up to you to decide how. What I'm going to show you now is basically some tools that you can use to ensure that you have the consent you need for actually communicating with the recipients that you have in your database. So these are some of the important individual digital rights that each of us has after 25th of May. And I'm going to use those rights to actually do the demo, basically. So what we're going to do is to look into how we have implemented features in BizWizard that enables you to actually comply with these individual rights, basically. So moving forward, and that will be the demo. So what we're going to do here is that I'm going to switch my screen. And the first thing I want to show you is something that we call a recipient page. And this is a new feature in BizWizard. And it is basically your way to be transparent towards your recipients and also give your recipients control over their data and what kind of communication they get from you and so on. So in this case, I have created a simple recipient page. I have some information at the top here. And then I have a section where all the publications in BizWizard that the recipient is subscribed to or historically has been subscribed to will be listed. So the recipient can easily see what kind of information do I get from this sender at the moment. And of course, the recipient can easily unsubscribe and subscribe and so on here. Okay, so control of what kind of information you are sending, basically, this recipient. The next section in the recipient page is a block where we list all the recipient properties that is stored about the recipient. Basically, the personal data that you store about the recipient. So you can be completely transparent here of what kind of data you have about the person. And of course, the person can export the personal data, and it will be in a file that can be read of other systems, basically. So completely self-service in this, if you want to set it up like this, of course. And in the bottom here, we have a section where we inform the recipient that if he or she wants to be forgotten or change any data or make restrictions to the processing or whatever, then they have to email the administrator of BizWizard, basically. And there is a button for that as well. And the reason for this is that sometimes or often, if we want to make changes or if we want to restrict anything and so on, in many organizations we don't only have personal data in BizWizard. We have it in a lot of other systems as well. So therefore, it's a good way to actually have these kind of actions as an email to someone that can ring the bell in the organization if something needs to be changed, also in other systems apart from BizWizard. So this is a basic recipient page, and I'm going to show you how you actually create those recipient pages in BizWizard. So I'm just going to see so that I'm logged in here. No. So recipient pages are found under the archive. So if you go to the archive, you will see a new menu option here, basically, called Recipient Pages. And if I click on that option, I will end up in a list. And as you can see here, I have two different recipient pages, and that's one thing that you can have in BizWizard. You can have more than two. You can have how many as you want, and that is because of the fact that many of our clients actually communicate with people speaking different languages. You might use BizWizard for different markets and different products and so on, and therefore you might want to be able to set up different recipient pages as well that you can brand and that you can make sure is on the correct language and so on. But I'm gonna jump into my English version here, and it's quite familiar with how everything else works in BizWizard. We have a quite simple settings page to start with, where you give the recipient page a name, of course. And then you have three input fields here that you don't need to fill out if you don't want to. But if you do it, those values that you fill out in these fields will be available as merge fields. Which is quite convenient and which I will show you in a little bit here. So those three fields here are a field for the data controller, and that is basically a requirement in all communication. We need to inform the recipient of who is the data controller, and most often that is a company, basically, and your company, if you are sending emails, of course. It is also a requirement, according to GDPR, to inform a recipient how to get in contact with the data controller. So we also have a field for to fill out an email address if you want to do that. And the last field here is a field where you can add some general GDPR information, or you can use it to write the purpose of why you are collecting and processing data, and why you have maybe this recipient's personal data in your systems and so on. So you can use this a little bit as you want, but I think many of us will use it to write a short privacy notice, basically, that we can reuse over different content and also use to describe for the people that we're communicating with of how we are working and why we are processing specific personal data and so on. Yes, next is basically the settings for how the different recipient properties will be displayed on the recipient page. And as you know, in BizWizard, we define different recipient properties under settings, and many times we name them not that good always, and it also only there are only one set of recipient properties, regardless if we are on many markets and so on. So they can be in languages that some of us don't understand and so on. So therefore, we have this table here to be able to actually set what we call a friendly name of how the recipient property should be displayed on this specific recipient page. So in this case, I have a mix of Swedish and English naming of the recipient properties in the database, but on my English recipient page, I have set names that are on English, basically. So it will be understandable and look nice on the recipient page. And it's just to click the pen and set the name. So it's quite easy. Then we, of course, have the recipient page itself. And it's easy to design and create recipient pages. It's in a familiar environment. It's the same drag and drop editor that we use for mails and web forms and everything else in BizWizard. And there are some specific recipient page blocks here, which you can use. So don't be afraid to drag, remove, and so on. It's easy to just include those specific blocks again to the page, and you can do whatever you want with the design. You can brand it and so on. So it's quite straightforward, I guess. To get to the recipient page, we need to know who the person accessing the page is, and this is because of the fact that we actually manage or displaying personal data on this page. So what a recipient needs to do to be able to get to the recipient page is actually to submit the email address that we are sending to, or that we have stored in our system here. And that is a form that you, of course, also can design. And when such form is submitted, the recipient will end up on a landing page saying that we have sent an email to you, go to your inbox and click the access link to get to your recipient page. And this is the way to actually log in to the recipient page. So we will send out an unique link, which is temporary and only valid for, I think it's like 30 minutes. Yeah, so you can, of course, also design and edit the last email where the recipient actually click on the link to get to the recipient page here. So this is basically the flow for a recipient to get to the page. And of course, if we include this link in an email where we know who the user is, or the recipient is, sorry, we will, of course, pre-populate the form with the right email address and so on. So it's just more a click to get to the recipient page. So this is basically how you set up your recipient page or your recipient pages. And I'm going to stop there with this and go to the Publications tab here. And on Publications, there is a new setting. And if you go to Settings on Publications, you will see a new field. And that is basically that you choose which recipient page should be connected to this publication. And this is important because if you have, say, an English and a Swedish recipient page, and you also have publications that you communicate on English and Swedish, you want to have the correct recipient page on those publications, so that if an English recipient actually get to the English version of the recipient page if you request it. So it's just to select which one you want to have on the specific publication, basically. Yes. And now, if I go in a publication and actually create an email, you will see what's happened. So I have a simple email here, and of course I can link to my recipient page in the content, and the recipient page is available through a special link in the insert link dialog. And if I click here, this will be a link to the recipient page connected to this publication where I'm actually creating the email in, basically. More, if I can do like this, data controller contact. So I can also, of course, use my merge fields, and now they are not the correct language strings here, but if I want to pick up the data that I inputted on the recipient page settings page, basically, I can do that as search fields in my content, since this publication is connected to a specific recipient page. So if I, for instance, want to have the data controller, I can insert that one there, and I can, of course, insert the email as well. And when that is done, I can save my email here and I preview it. And you will see that we will fetch the information submitted on the recipient page settings page there. And this is good because now you can steer this important information from one place, and then people can use it when they're creating content and so on. And you can also see in the bottom here, I have put it into my template, basically, and ensuring that this little GDPR text that I set on the recipient page settings will be fetched also and showed on all emails I will be sent out from this publication, basically. So that's a good thing. One place where you actually administer this kind of information, and then you can reuse it. Great. So another thing that is of importance, as we talked about earlier, is the requirement of consent. And one question that we get a lot here is how should I proceed if I want to ask my existing recipients about a new consent to be able to send them emails in the future. And I know that not every one of you will do that, but some of you might want to do that. And therefore, we have created some new features that allows you to do that in a quite smooth way. So I'm gonna show you what you need to do to be able to do that. So first, what you need to do is that you need to create a new recipient property that you call something. I can show you here. I have created a new recipient property called consent that is of the type checkbox, and it only has one value, and that it's okay, basically. And then you basically create a feedback form where you design it and say that you want basically or a way for the user to actually give you consent to continue sending them emails. And in my case here, I have created a really simple form, renew consent form, and I'm actually asking the recipient to just tick the checkbox. That's okay for you to keep sending me emails, and then the recipient submits the form, basically. That's what you need to prepare for being able to doing this. After you have done that, you can simply create an email where you, in a nice way, inform your recipient about what's going to happen, and that due to the new EU rules, want or need a renewed approval to be able to send you emails in the future. And then you just link to this form that you have created, and basically send it to your recipients. So I will send an email here to Christian. And I'm going to open up my inbox. And here is the email. So I have this email, hi Christian, blah, blah, blah. We want your approval. So I click the link, which will take me to the form. And I just say, okay, you can continue sending me information, and I submit my answer. I land on the landing page here. Thank you for your response. And in this case, I have also created a link to the recipient page. So, and inform the user, the recipient, that he can always go to the recipient page to see what kind of data we store, and if he wants to make changes to what kind of information we send to him, basically. So yeah, and of course I just get to the login form and I can ask for the temporary link. But that's not what we're going to do now. Instead, what we did now was basically that we sent out an email to a recipient that we don't have a correct consent for. We informed the recipient to go to this form and actually tick the checkbox to say that it's okay for us to keep sending him communication. And if we now go to the recipient page here and look into the different recipients here, we can see that Christian at Demo Company has a consent that is okay. The typical way here is that you do this 3 steps where you create a new recipient property, you create a form, you send out an email to your recipient asking for the consent. You can of course send a reminder if they haven't responded in a certain time or so. And then when at some point which you decide that now we don't have more time to actually collect consents, then you need to basically, or can, you can remove or delete the recipient that you don't have a correct consent for. And to do that, we have also implemented another new feature, and that is a filter function on the recipient page, where you easily can say that, okay, give me all the recipients in my database that don't have a consent. And then I filter, and the ones that I have a consent for will disappear from this list, and I will only have recipients that we don't have the consent recipient property ticked in. And then I can just click on select all and delete the users that I don't want to have in my database anymore. So this is a way to actually, if you want to renew your consents with your recipients. I don't say that everyone needs to do it or want to do it, but if you want to do it, you can do it in this way. And it's quite a smooth process. I forgot to mention one thing regarding the form that I'm using to collect the renew consent. This is basically a field type of pre-filled fields. And you can see that I have the consent checkbox here, which I have dragged into my form. What you also need to do is to actually tick this checkbox. It's a new checkbox to actually update the recipient property when the user submits the form. If this one is not ticked, you won't get the recipient property updated. So that's important. Great. Last thing I want to show you is also one thing that you might want to do. And you know, on all publications, we have our subscription forms or opt-in forms. And in many cases, I'm gonna go to another one here. In many cases, they are quite simple. Something like this, maybe just an email field and some text. Due to the GDPR or the individual right that you should be informed, you might want to actually extend your subscriptions forms a little bit. And one thing that we have added as well is a special tick box, basically, where you can enforce the user to actually click the checkbox as well before submitting the email address. But you can also add text to this checkbox. And in this case, I have just used the merge field for the GDPR information that I have on the recipient page connected to this publication. And that will basically show why we are collecting this information, how we will work with the information, and so on. So that's a little bit of a tip. And then, of course, you have this checkbox required. So when the user enters the email address, she also needs to actually tick the box, checkbox, to be able to submit the form. So you have basically a little bit more control, and it's also a requirement that it should be clear what the recipient actually do when submitting this. So this be one thing that you might want to prepare and work with until the 25th, that you go through your subscription forms and make sure that they are appropriate and that they inform the person of what you're going to do with the information and so on. So yeah, that's it. And here you can see when we preview this form, we will fetch the data that we have added on the recipient page. So we have it all stored on one place. Okay, something else that we have been working with is to improve the traceability throughout BizWizard, how data has ended up in the system, basically. We are not completely ready with that. We will be soon. But for instance, if you go in on a recipient, you can definitely see how a recipient was created and when. And here you will see if it was via subscription form, via a manual import, via an integration, and so forth. So you will have information about how the user was created and ended up in the system. What we also do is that we working now on actually adding information on all recipient fields or recipient properties fields, so that you can see when and how a specific recipient property were collected and changed, basically. So that you will also see here on each recipient. We have added a section on the recipient card as well, where you can see what kind of publication or what publications are is this recipient actually receiving communication from, and what has been opted out, and so on. And of course, this is nothing new, but you can also, of course, see which recipient lists recipient is a part of. Also, I think I can show you on this one. Yeah. Also, when you do manual import of recipients to BizWizard through an Excel file or whatever, we have also introduced the possibility to name the import so that you have traceability when, of course, how the user was created, but also when and by which import. So you can see that in the recipient card as well. Yeah, and well, we're working a little bit more with those traceability features and increasing the visibility of how data was created and changed, and it will soon be ready. The last thing I want to just mention for you is that we will also implement features in BizWizard to enable you to actually set up reduction rules. And reduction rules is a way for you to set up automated jobs in the system for when different kind of information should be deleted. So you don't need to do that manually and manage that manually. And this is something that we're working on. I can't say a lot about it now, exactly what kind of rules and on what kind of filters you will be able to use and so on. But you will be able to set up these automated jobs for actually deleting personal data from the system, both data that you have on recipients, but also in form responses when you're using the form functionality in BizWizard. So I think that was the demo. I'm gonna go back to my presentation and talk a little bit about the time plan. So what we have seen here today is basically a demo of the new feature Recipient Pages and how it works and what you can do with it. We have seen the way of request a new consent from your recipients, and the possibility to actually update the recipient property from a form. That's the feature basically that we, including the filter functionality in the recipient list, that we add to be able to do this. And we have looked a little bit on the improved traceability. And regarding the improved traceability, some of these features are already in production environment. Some will be added soon. And those three things here are soon, meaning that I will not say a date, but in the upcoming weeks, this will be available for you. So you can start working with these features if you want to. You don't need to, but if you want to. And when we're done with this, we will continue with reduction rules. We don't think this is that time critical, since you will probably set up rules that will be in the future. So therefore, we have done this prioritization basically. But we will continue with reduction rules as soon as this is out, basically. So that is what I have for now. So I don't know how the status with questions is. So my suggestion is like this. Since I don't sit in the same room as Ulf, who is in control over the chat, ask your questions in the chat. We will try to respond to them immediately. If we can't, we will get back to you with answers on them in an email. Okay, so thank you for now, and have a good day.